There was a heavy weight on John's chest, a pressure that stole his breath and replaced it with an icy dread. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone, stolen by the oppressive darkness pressing down on him. Was this the end? Was this how his story would end? He woke up with a gasp, heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The wind howled outside, a mournful cry that echoed the turmoil in his soul. What had been a nightmare was now a reality. The world was unraveling, mirroring the chaos that raged within him. His gaze fell on a book lying on his nightstand, its pages open to a passage he'd read countless times before, yet never with such foreboding. The Book of Revelation, the last book in the Christian Bible, spoke of a world turned upside down, of plagues and tribulations, of a great battle between good and evil, but most chillingly, it spoke of 4 horsemen who rode forth from the abyss, bringing with them death, war, famine, and disease. He remembered the dream vividly now, the ground splitting open beneath him, the sulphurous stench of the abyss, and those horsemen emerging from the fiery chasm, their silhouettes stark against the flames. They rode toward him, their eyes burning with an otherworldly light, their expressions inscrutable, and then they'd vanished, leaving him in suffocating darkness. John sat there paralyzed, the words from the book echoing in his head. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come." The words seemed to leap off the page and pierce his soul. Hadn't he just heard a horse whinnying outside? Hadn't he felt the ground beneath him rumble as if something heavy had passed by? Dismissing it as a figment of his overactive imagination, he stumbled out of bed. The room was as he'd left it, yet now it seemed smaller, the walls closing in on him, the air thick with anticipation. As if sensing the gravity of the situation, his dog, Shadow, whimpered from her spot by the door, her fur bristling, her ears flattened against her head. John knelt beside her, stroking her back reassuringly. But even as he did, a chill ran down his spine. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Bolts of lightning split the sky, momentarily banishing the gloom and revealing the churning blackness beyond. John stood transfixed, his gaze fixed on the raging elements, his mind grappling with the unsettling premonition that had taken root in his gut. A sudden crash from upstairs tore him from his thoughts. He whirled around, his heart pounding anew. Had he imagined it, or was someone, or something, inside his house? He wasn't sure, but the rational part of his brain screamed at him to check. Armed with a baseball bat he found in the corner, he crept toward the stairs. Each creak of the floorboard under his feet sounded like a death knell in the eerie silence between the crashes of thunder. As he ascended the stairs, his hand trembled, the bat feeling woefully inadequate in the face of whatever menace lurked above. At the top of the stairs, he paused, listening intently. All was silent now. The crashing abruptly ceased. The room was in disarray, as if someone had ransacked it in a blind rage. The curtains were torn from their rails and lay in shreds at the far corner of the room. His Bible, the one he'd read earlier, was open on his desk, its pages fluttering wildly, as if stirred by an unseen breeze. But it wasn't these disturbances that truly captured his attention. It was what he saw in the middle of the room, or rather what he heard. In the center of the chaos sat a rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth, as though someone had just risen from it in a hurry. The rhythmic creaking of the old wood was like a dirge, a solemn requiem for whatever peace he'd known until this point in his life. And then he heard it again, a whisper, soft, insidious, slithering into his ear like a venomous snake. "Heed my warning, John, for your time is nigh." The voice dripped with menace, each word a nail hammered into the coffin of his sanity. But when he turned to locate its source, he found nothing. He wanted to call out, to demand an answer, but no sound emerged from his lips. Trapped in a prison of his own terror, he couldn't understand why this was happening, why he was chosen, if indeed he was. Then he heard it again. The distinct sound of horses' hooves pounding the pavement outside his house. They were heavy thuds, like the tread of some monstrous beast. John rushed to the window and peered out. The storm had intensified. Rain lashed against the glass. Wind screamed, and lightning illuminated the street in stark, terrifying glimpses. Through the downpour, he saw them, for riders astride horses, as tall as towers, their forms dark and imposing against the flashing lightning. Each rider was garbed in different attire, yet each was more terrifying than the last. The first wore white, his face hidden behind a horned helmet. A cruel smile, almost demonic in its glee, played on his lips, and as he passed, John saw figures vanish into thin air, as if absorbed into the rider's very essence. The second rider was a vision of carnage. Dressed in red, he spurred his mount forward, causing people to flee in terror. Buildings burst into flames, their windows like vacant eyes staring blankly at the sky. People ran, their screams swallowed by the tempest, their terror palpable even from this distance. The third rider was a grim spectre clad in black, his face obscured by a hooded cloak. He rode past empty supermarkets where food rotted on shelves and mothers clutched their children close, whispering prayers. Hunger and despair were his companions. The fourth and final rider was the stuff of nightmares. Cloaked in bone-white robes, Death rode silently, his skeletal hand gripping the reins. Wherever he passed, animals and birds dropped lifeless from the sky. People collapsed as if struck by an invisible arrow. With each passing moment, the world seemed to fall apart. John watched, horrified, as the riders continued their ghastly procession. He knew, with a bone-deep certainty that sent chills down his spine, that the apocalypse foretold in the book of Revelation was unfolding right before his eyes. This wasn't a dream, a nightmare, or some morbid fantasy. This was his new reality. As the last rider disappeared into the swirling darkness, John saw a flash of movement in his peripheral vision. It was small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of the unfolding horror, yet it sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over him. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the gloom. John stared after him, his mind reeling. Who was that child? Why was he here? And what did he mean by winter? The silence descended once more, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the incessant drumming of the rain. Suddenly, the sky flashed and thunder roared, drowning out the sound of the receding horsemen. But amidst the cacophony, John heard another sound, a low, ominous hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. It grew louder with every passing moment, vibrating through his bones and sending a fresh wave of fear crashing over him. In the distance, a dark cloud was rising, billowing and twisting like a monstrous serpent poised to strike. The rider gestured toward him, and John recoiled, a strangled cry escaping his lips. As the rider approached, John saw the horns on his helmet glisten in the firelight, and he heard the whisper in his ear again, "Your time is nigh, John." The ground shook with the rider's every step, and the air grew thick with the stench of brimstone and decay. The rider raised his head and let out a deafening roar, a primal scream that echoed the chaos in John's soul. In the book of Revelation, it spoke of a great multitude following the rider bearing the mark, a multitude so vast it seemed to fill the earth. John knew that whatever hope it clung to was now lost. The rider was upon him, and he could feel the heat of the approaching fire on his skin. John fell to his knees, his hands trembling, his eyes wide with terror. The rider loomed over him, and John could see the twisted mockery of a smile on his face. The rider held out a hand, revealing a scroll. "Take this, John," he rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "It is your fate." The scroll unfurled, revealing words written in blood. "Babylon the Great has fallen." John looked up, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I will not serve you," he cried. The rider's smile widened, revealing teeth as sharp as daggers. "You have no choice, John," he hissed, "for the mark is coming." As the rider leaned closer, John saw the horns on his helmet glint in the firelight. They were symbols of power, of control, of the coming darkness. John recoiled, knowing that whatever hope he'd clung to was now lost. The rider leaned closer, his hot breath on John's neck. "Your time is nigh, John," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. The screen fades to black as the horde closes in, their chanting growing louder. The sound of screaming and fire fills the air. The words part two. "The riders have come," appear in dark red, dripping like blood against the black backdrop. Below that, "Next, the mark is coming." The screen goes completely black as the chanting reaches a fever pitch. The sound of thunderclaps, horses' hooves, and clashing swords builds in intensity.